If you have a B2B service business, you've probably heard of Airtable as a tool. Maybe you're used to using ClickUp or Google Sheets or what have you. Let's talk today about how you can automate your business with Airtable. So everybody from really 5K a month agencies to mega corporations like Red Bull, all use Airtable. I know the Red Bull thing is a fact because we work with somebody who used to work with Red Bull. And so I'm going to tell you how you can create a custom system for your business to scale to the moon without losing your mind. So the benefit really of Airtable, how to think about Airtable, is it's a source of truth for your business. And I'll talk to you like visually, I'll walk you through how we think about this, right? It's a source of truth that does a few things. So number one, all right, at the center here, it gives you a way to get info out of your head in terms of like admin and billing. It'll be able to track things like system KPIs. So how fast is your business running? Which clients owe you money? Things like that. And then of course, like client statuses for managers. This is like the admin level information. So the business owners can see it, or like that's one audience for Airtable. The second audience for Airtable is clients and automating client tasks. So this could be automatic client reports, client QA, client quality assurance, and client checks of deliverables. In this case, we have an example of a Slack bot, which is based on Airtable as a backend for the data, but the Slack bot is showing a call feedback form for a lead generation, a performance-based lead generation agency. And so this kind of client-facing information is possible with Airtable. And then the third part is the third audience, right? So the business owners, the clients, and the third part is your team. So with the great Airtable build, what's really cool is you can have your team, all this data that's in their head or on a bunch of different tools scattered around. You can get all that out of their head and make their job easier, which of course makes your job as a business owner easier and make sure clients get better results. So our target is basically an Airtable base, an Airtable build that's got the data and the interfaces and dashboards and things like that for those three audiences: the business owner, clients, and the people on your team that are updating the data, updating client status, project status, and things like that. So that's generally where we're going here. That's the objectives. All right. So again, just to reiterate, is to create a source of truth that your team can get project status out of their head, because if something is in their head, it cannot be automated, and it's obviously taking up brain space, so they're slower at their job, and their job is more stressful. So we're trying to optimize your team's workflow, allow your business to take on more clients without anybody dropping balls, right? The more clients you add, your head is always limited in terms of what can be stored there, and so we want to be able to enable capacity in your business. Allow you to always know what your current KPIs and bottlenecks are, right? So you as a business owner can sit back and say, well, this one step is taking a little bit longer than it needs to be taking. I wonder if we change our onboarding form or do some employee training and speed that up. So that's the other thing that will happen. And then of course, making automations. At Ops Kings, we do not do automations on top of Google Sheets, nor do we do automations on top of other tools like ClickUp and things like that. And the reason for that is because if the data doesn't match a certain standard, we can't rely that the backend data is actually in the right format and is updated and stuff correctly. And so any kind of automation on top of that just becomes really, really problematic to run. So that's the goal. If you're running like ClickUp or Google Sheets or something and you've had trouble with automations, or you're running those tools and you're finding like it's really hard to get your team to tell you what the status of a certain project is, or it takes them a long time to answer, or you're feeling like you can't really take on more clients without balls dropping, or you're too involved in like the day-to-day stuff like that, or you actually don't know how things are running, then this video will help you. So what is the philosophy? Where like philosophically there's the technology of Airtable, but how do we at Ops Kings think about the philosophy of the advantages of it? So the philosophy really is to model your business not like a project management, a bunch of project management tasks, but rather like a manufacturing facility. So an assembly line, right? Think about like Henry Ford and building the first Model T. So why is that conceptually, why is it possible, and why does it work really well? Why does it work really well? Imagine the amount of capacity that a manufacturing process has. It has amazing capacity, right? I actually have a background in engineering. I used to work for a company that was doing the software to actually run manufacturing lines for big companies like Mars Chocolate. Spent a lot of time in like M&M's factories and Twix factories. And so I very much know what this is like. If you think about a manufacturing process, somehow they're selling $1 chocolate bars in a massive factory, and they make billions of dollars, and they're still profitable, which is pretty amazing. So we want to give your business the same level of capacity of that manufacturing process. And the cool thing that happens when you have that is, of course, the capacity, but everyone's job gets easier, right? Because they can just update a system, and everybody knows that like the entity of a client as it goes along a process, or a landing page if you make landing pages or something like that. Everybody knows where it's at. So that's why it works. And then how do we do that? Well, we do that from taking this sort of high level entity of a project and a bunch of subtasks, and transforming that into a singular entity that is a client that's moving along a process, right? Kind of like a digital manufacturing facility. So the way we're doing this with Airtable, and Airtable provides this flexibility, we're really matching the data entities to your business. I'm going to show you how to do that, and how to identify the main archetypes and the main strategies for how to do that. So the benefit of doing all this is way simpler data. So rather than you have like one landing page that moves through 10 steps. So the landing page could be in one of 10 different places, as opposed to one landing page with 10 subtasks. So each of those subtasks could be done or not done. And all of a sudden you have 100 possibilities, right? So it's 10 squared if it's done or not done, or maybe it's, not done, blocked, and done. And all of a sudden you have 10 cubed, which is 1,000 possible different statuses. So we're really simplifying the data a lot, which means it's simpler for your team to keep track of, you to keep track of, and it's simpler for you to give an update to a client. The second advantage is no redundancy. So if you have data stored incorrectly, all of a sudden you've got like multiple lists of clients, multiple like states things could be in, and you get redundant data, which means you have to have a bunch of SOPs telling your team, like, make sure you update it there and there. If you have an automation syncing things back and forth, that automation can break. And so you end up having redundancy, which is crazy. You don't have one source of truth. People can't rely on it. So if you ever have a system where people are like, yeah, we should use ClickUp, but we don't really update it, it's because people find it unreliable, probably because it's structured in the wrong way. So that's the second thing. And then having one tool. So if you have, Monday.com plus a Google Sheet plus Trello for things plus Notion, all of a sudden you've got data stored in different tools. It's confusing for your team to know what to do. It takes time. Again, we have things getting out of sync. We've got some redundant data. And then the other benefit is like customizing KPIs, which I'll show you some formulas and cool things for in a second, they're really customized to the way that you do your business. All right. So I'm going to show you some examples of what is like. So we have like the basics for Airtable, the basic philosophy, which is extremely powerful. But I also want to show you some really cool use cases to give your to expand your mind a little bit. So some really cool use cases that what I mean by this custom KPIs and alerts and things. So this is a system that does automatic split testing of prices. You can do things like creating views that adapt to the user based on who's logged in, and show like this user plus the supervisor can see everybody on their team. So you can do things like that. You can create custom views where your team has a portal where they can see a task and the files and the SOPs and who the client is and all that kind of stuff in one. We can roll up things like, so you can make formulas that show custom data for how your process works. So in this case, these are some formulas that we used for tracking story points and the number of features spec'd per sprint for different clients. and we've got some like formulas that show different emojis and statuses here. So there's lots of different things you can do. These are some KPI, some graph examples. So this is one graph we find really useful that shows the amount of time that a feature for us or a project or whatever spends in certain statuses along the way. So you can see where your bottlenecks are. Again, you can track that week by week as well, or project by project. We do some stuff with generating meeting agendas automatically, where and you can do the same kind of thing with Airtable as well, which is like this. The formulas are really, really cool. Let's see some else stuff. So, and then alerting if a project is overdue but not critical yet. So you can catch things before they are critical issues. We've got some stuff around like estimating who is the most available, auto-generating QA or quality assurance for written content, lots and lots of stuff. So anyway, the result really is fearless scale. So we generally work with businesses they're really great at what they do. Their process is great, but the way they store data is slowing them down, slowing their team down. So really what we're aiming for here is fearless scale. So if you do everything that I'm going to tell you about, I hope that you will get that result as well. And then really we're talking about transforming management from like an active, like checking in on things all the time and being worried about the day-to-day to sitting back and looking at the process and being more strategic about optimizing things like your employee training or coaching or onboarding or pricing and sales and marketing and things like that. So we work with clients where they want to go from 100K per month to $1 million a month this year, and this is the kind of things that we think about. So hopefully I'll dump as much of my brain out as I can. This is going to be a long video, but hopefully you're the kind of person that is wanting to do this. Otherwise, I don't know why you'd be watching. So, okay, we talked about that. Oh, okay. So let's take other side benefits, right? So redundancy. So just like simplifying your data a little bit, having one tool rather than multiple tools, self-management of a team, minimizing errors, and scaling fast, right? So why should you listen to me? Who is this Ryan guy talking to you with a math hat? As I mentioned, I have a background in doing automation for pretty big companies. So things like Nestle and Mars Chocolate, coal companies, pharma, things like that. And so where I come from is the engineering capability that's necessary for those big companies. If you want to know like a couple specifics, I designed the blending system for M&Ms that's used across a few places in China. I'm the co-founder of Ops Kings. People pay us a lot of money to speed up their business, and you can check out our case studies on our website, as well as we have a separate YouTube channel for that. And our team working on these strategies have scaled businesses like 2 to 3x or more in the space of a pretty short amount of time, purely from better tech and better backend, right? And the reason that happens is the owners are able to look at it and say, okay, we can definitely handle more clients. Their clients are getting better results. They refer more people. So fulfillment really is a strong driver of business growth. So all that being said, let's get into it. So what do we do first? What is our process? There's really like 6 steps here. So the first step is determine the system archetypes for your business. So of course your business, I don't know what your business is. We've seen a lot of businesses, and the really interesting thing about a business is there's a lot more similarities between systems versus like industries. So I'll pull up this system archetype list. So what we've noticed is that in any given business, there's a number of different systems. So you have like sales, maybe you have onboarding, maybe you produce landing pages, or you have, you're producing like campaigns and you have an inbox management system. And so really what I'll just do here is go over it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different kinds of system archetypes, and hopefully you'll be able to see some of this stuff in your own business. So first thing is a service list, right? So this is characterized by, like, if you're a fractional CMO, maybe you do all sorts of like random marketing things. We work with a client that does, they're like a fractional CPA business. And so this is characterized by a bunch of things that can be done in like literally any order. This is This is like ClickUp. All right. So this one honestly is the hardest one to scale. What we tend to do is try to break the service list into services where all the tasks are batched together. And so you can start to go, well, we had this one client and they got these 3 services from us versus these 200 tasks. So really what characterizes a service list is things that can be done in any order. Now, the next system up the list, which is easier to scale, is a pipeline. So what a pipeline is like, you producing a landing page. So everything that comes in the pipeline has to be done in a certain order, and then out comes the result. So if you're producing landing pages, you would do copy, and then maybe you'd have a senior copywriter to review it, and then you have a design, and then maybe you review with the client, and then after the client says okay to the Figma design, you pass it off to a web developer who actually makes it a reality on the web, and then it's live, and that's a pipeline. So the difference between a service list and a pipeline is that things have to happen in the same order. Now, why does this matter for Airtable? Well, this matters for Airtable when you start to think about what tables should we actually do. So for a service list, it's a bunch of tasks. For a pipeline, we can take all those tasks and model it kind of like that manufacturing process I was talking about, right? We can have one single select dropdown that has statuses, kind of like this. And every record in a table would be like one project or one landing page, for instance. Okay, so I will do a separate video on all the different system archetypes. But the first thing you're going to do is pick, again, as I'm going through this list, think about what is the highest volume system or process in your business, and then what is the matching archetype for that thing. And pay attention to when I'm talking about that, because there's a different Airtable architecture that we use depending on the archetype. Okay, so pipeline and a funnel. Okay, so funnel is the same as a pipeline, except things can drop out of it. So sales funnel. Sales funnel is just like a pipeline, except all the leads that book a call with you, maybe they don't close, right? So things still happen in order, but what you have to also do is keep track of 3 different other statuses. So you have how far they are in the pipeline, and then whether they're still active, whether the lead has chosen to reject the pipeline and say, I don't want to do the pipeline anymore, the deal is lost, or you have rejected the candidate or the thing, right? So sales funnel is like this. Cold email is like this. The sending tool actually does the sending. You have a ton of 1,000 emails sent. Some of them are opened. Of those ones that are open, some of them are clicked, some of them get response. Some of them get a call booked. Some of those calls show up, and some of those close, right? So that is a funnel. A funnel and a pipeline are exactly the same. And you can see, for example, a landing page agency is a pipeline in terms of, client onboarding is a pipeline. Because every single client that pays you, you're not going to reject them through the onboarding process. You're going to fully onboard them, right? Every single landing page, you're going to produce the landing page, right? Okay, a funnel. Actually, here's an interesting difference between a funnel and a pipeline. So let's say you run. There's a link between these two, right? So, for example, let's say we have a client that does real estate. So there's a bunch of different property owners, hedge funds. Those hedge funds have properties, and this company says they do the marketing and fill up those properties with applicants, right? So they have. You might think it's kind of like two together, right? Because on one hand, you have a property and you need to fill up that property, right? But on the other hand, we have a funnel of applicants. What do we do, right? And so we call it a matching funnel, which is sort of the funnel is matching to the property. And so this is things like a recruiting agency. They would have one position they're going to fill, but they have to source a bunch of applicants. And those applicants could either say, actually, after I got the interview, I'm no longer interested in the job. They could be active, or the recruiting agency owner could say, you know what, after interviewing you, we decided that we want to reject you from the app, from the process. Okay. So this is a matching funnel. The way I think about it is like a pipeline and a funnel together. Okay. So this is recruiting, property leasing. UGC is like this, where you have one concept that you have to source, or the one concept that you have to produce. But to source, to get the right creator, you have to contact a bunch of possible creators. Those possible creators could say no to you. The client could say no, or maybe you internally deny the creator. Okay? So again, hopefully you can use pause the video and read through, depending on your service type. I would say like it gets kind of, yeah, like the matching funnel. I was thinking like is one more common than others? You know, it depends, right? Okay, so next thing is a performance tree. This is kind of the same, or this has a lot of similarities to the funnel as well. So the performance tree, think about this from the perspective of like the goal of the performance tree is to, actually it's not the match, find lots of high quality output. Oh shit, I forgot. No. There we go. Okay, I'm modified the wrong cell. Okay, so performance tree, think of this like an ad agency. So if you're an ad agency and you're trying to produce creative, you don't have to actually finish every single creative. So you might do something like, we have one client that they do TikTok organic, and they produce about 800 different pieces of content every single day. The way they monetize that is they will work with brands that want to like leverage their audience, right? And so when they work with a paid brand, the paid brand comes in and says, "Hey, we want to promote like this coffee cup," and what they'll do is they'll produce a number of different pieces of content and just see which one starts to pop. And so their goal is to start with a couple of high-level ideas for how to promote that coffee cup or that whatever that product is, test out those concepts to see which one is working the best, and go all in on those concepts. So they have this concept of a pipeline in a way, because they go through certain steps to complete any given piece of video content, for example. But in a performance tree, the difference between a performance tree and a pipeline, and the reason we call it a tree is because it branches out. So you start with maybe an initial idea for a video, and then you produce 5 different videos on that, and you realize one of those concepts work really well, and so you kind of go all in and produce more variations of that, and then more variations of that one, and more variations of that one, and abandon the angles that are not working. And so the goal of the performance tree is to get the highest performance fastest. Okay, so this is ads. This is a lot of marketing agencies that don't do only like one. They don't do creative. So if you were a marketing agency and you only produced the creative and you didn't run the ads and didn't do the media buying or strategy, you would probably be closer to a pipeline. Okay. So, and again, you might have a combination of these two. So you might have a UGC agency and also do media buying, in which case your strategy is kind of more of a performance tree, but the actual fulfillment of the producing the concept is closer to a matching funnel. So every business will have multiple systems depending on how many different offers and how large the business is. Okay. And then the last one is event handling. So this is like things like customer service, right? This is where quality is not so important, or doesn't have to be perfect, but speed really, really is. Inbox management, customer service, things like that, right? So your goal is to respond quickly and convert as many units as possible. So we have some common KPIs here. You guys can pause the video and go through this and just kind of read through it. But let me scan through this. These are the KPIs that we would graph or chart in Airtable, and then we also have the pipeline here is the most common. Anyway, you can look at the status and things like that. So these are the Airtable architecture thoughts, depending on subsystem or the system archetype. Task archetypes will come to that later. Okay, so that is the first step, is figure out the system archetypes, and you want 4 highest volume system, right? If you have, let's say, a lot of people come to us and they're like, I want an onboarding automation. And we're like, how many clients do you onboard per month? And they said, well, 1. But they also do 100 landing pages a month or 100 videos per month for that one client. So in my experience, you will get far more value out of picking the highest volume system archetype than one that is the most obvious or what have you. So I would do that. By the way, the thing we start with is we will do what is called a company brain in Lucidchart. So Lucidchart, this is the software. Here we go, Lucidchart, it's this one. I have no vested interest in Lucidchart. That's just what we use. You can use Mira, you can use whatever you want. We produce a flow chart of the business. I'm going to show you some examples of that in a second. So if you want to get a lay of the land for how any given system works, we always start with a company brain. That conversation typically takes about an hour or so per major system in the business. And we're doing that to get the details needed for when we design the actual system. So that's the first step, is the system archetype. All right. Next step, phase 2, is data architecture. So I'm going to show you this here. This is where we get into like actually planning out your Airtable build. So why don't we start with just putting random tables in Airtable? It's because you're going to end up with the wrong thing. So I'm going to show you how to do this in a second. All right, phase 2, data architecture. So what you're going to do in this phase, right? So we picked out like the system. We're like, okay, let's say you're a pipeline business. You're like, you do a bunch of landing pages. You're like, you're going to do the pipeline model, right? You're like, great, pipeline, got it. What you're going to do is first get all your existing data, right? So if you have stuff in ClickUp, if you have stuff in Google Sheets or Trello or wherever you store your most current client list and project list, you're going to gather all that together. So you want everything for fulfillment, for finance, for all your business, right? Get all the data, okay? Get it all. The next step is you're going to define the lists, or like, here's how to think about this, right? Lists, okay? Conceptually, that's probably the easiest way to think about it. Airtable is what's called a relational database. And so this can be a bit of like a weird concept to think about, but get the lists. So you probably have like a list of clients, a list of contacts these clients, a list of team members, right? You have probably a list of deliverables or projects, a list of invoices, a list of errors, a list of, different things. So you're going to define what those lists are, okay? Each of your lists becomes tables. So you want to try to, in step 2, get everything you can out of your head in terms of what you'd want to keep track of, what you'd want to have to like know about to know that like everything is handled, right? Brainstorm all this. By the way, you might have tasks. When you're looking at tasks specifically, or if you call them tasks, what I would start to do, like the task thing is far more difficult to manage than something like a pipeline or like a matching funnel model. So what I would do with tasks is try to think about like, is this task related to an entity, related to a list? So is this, hey, I need to send an invoice to this client. Okay, you have like the client list and the invoice list. Okay, so think about categorizing tasks because you'll find it a lot easier to manage like one entity moving through a process than a bunch of different tasks that are scattered all over the place. Okay, so that is step 2. Step 3, this is a fun one, is properties and relationships. So for example, for your client entity, right, you probably want to track the client contacts for that client, right? Because one client contact probably only relates to one client, like organization, okay? You could have an SEO company where one person owns multiple websites and you run projects or you have plans based on the website, okay? So just like I use this as an example here, but just because I use this as an example doesn't mean like you should just copy this blatantly. you do want to define properties and relationships for your business, right? So I use the colors here so you can see like the colored things are the main entities, and these actually are going to be the main tables in your Airtable build. And so to me anyway, it's like when I'm communicating the idea of an entity and the relationships between those entities, I like to use color and bold to make it clear to everybody that this is the same thing as this. But you can use your own thing. So maybe we have like the Stripe customer ID, right? And you probably want to know like the data at that level. So for example, the number of open projects for the client, right? Because if a client has no open projects, that could be a sales task to say, you know what, we should probably contact this person and see if they need help, right? Or if they've paid all their invoices, you should have open projects because you should be delivering something that they paid for, right? Or paid invoices, right? We track for our clients whether we have a testimonial recorded from them or not, and actually how far along the testimonial status is. So you probably want to track the same, right? How far we track, for example, the date they joined, how many days they've been with us, and their subjective happiness, and whether they have a testimonial. Because if their subjective happiness is high and they've been with us for a while, we want to remind our team and our account managers that, hey, you should ask them for a testimonial video. So you can use this step to really brainstorm and like dream and design what you would want to know about each of these different entities for your business to be just your dream business. Okay. If you want us to do this with you, I'll leave a link so you can book a call and things like that below. But this is something you can definitely do on your own as well if you're budget constrained or got lots of time on your hands. We would store the Slack channel IDs, right? We typically do some automations where you automatically generate Slack channels, and you probably want to be able to know what Slack channels there are, and you can link to those later. And so we would store things like that. Right? And the total amount of like what's your LTV? Some people want to store this separately from their, like they want to create 2 different Airtable bases or 3, and I'll show you some examples of that in a second. You can create like the main operating system, a CRM base, as well as a finance base, right? Typically, or if you're a solo operator, you can put them all together if you really want to. But you probably want to store at some point how much each client has paid you and if they owe you any money, right? For example, for client contacts, you would store like the name, email, maybe some notes for the person, like, hey, this is Ryan, his birthday's in October, and he really likes cute puppies, right? You may want to store relationship type stuff or what their job title is. That would be stored against the contact, not against the client, okay? Then, so the client they're associated to, right? Now, you also have projects, or like you could have projects, right? If you're a UGC business, your entities are different. Maybe you have creators and you have concepts or like video, like UGC pieces of creative you're producing, right? For every raw video, you probably produce many variants. So these are the entities really do depend on the type of business you're working with, right? So don't just copy what I've got here. Really think about your own entities. If we look at like a recruiting business, you have one client that is posting X number of roles or positions that are open. For all those roles, you have applications that you receive, and for every application, it's linked to an applicant, because you could have one application that you receive. Maybe they're not a good fit for role A, but you realize, 6 months later, that exact same person, you could resuggest, like, role B came up, and we think you'd be a great fit for that. So think about those as like, those are some example entities to think about. If you're doing like a CRM system, I'll drop a link below. We have a free CRM that you can download and kind of see some practical examples of this. You'd have like the concept of an opportunity. You probably have multiple calls for that same opportunity, and you may want to track for that opportunity, how many calls have I done, right? You might have things like that. Okay. So errors, sometimes our clients, especially if they're doing a lot of creative, and they're careful about quality assurance, they probably want to do things like tagging errors so they can see what are the most common mistakes that my writing team or my editing team is making. So that may be an entity. You might have like the error, the like instructional video for how to fix that error, the SOP, and then that way you could run a report showing like what are my most common errors, or which of my writers or editors made the most mistakes, right? We've used this to rank team members so you can distribute products or projects automatically. So really like do this, like this is a really important exercise. When we build an Airtable for a client, this takes us, we do think about this carefully, and we go through a few iterations based on what they need. If you're doing this all yourself, really think about this as a dreaming process, because there's lots of things you can track, and really the only limitations are your imagination. Like that's truly it. All right. So, team members, right? So you probably store like the name of the team member, their Slack, and you may have finance stuff separate, or you may have it together. I would actually separate the pay rate. Just you don't want people seeing how much their colleagues are getting paid, but maybe you have the pay rate information stored somewhere in a synced base, and maybe you have like the base salary, maybe their minimums, like the minimum salary or their performance stuff. Like you would give them a bonus or pay them per landing page they produced, or if they book a call, they get a performance bonus or something like that. So. And you probably want to track things like how many projects has this person done over the last week? Are they late? Or do they have good quality, bad quality, things like that? So all these things can be tracked. Really, just dream. Like get the ideas out of your head and on a paper. It's super, super helpful. Okay, and maybe invoices, right? So these are examples of the kinds of entities that you can store, but really you're looking at properties and relationships, right? So these all become tables and they're fields. So you don't want to do it like client 1 is a table, client 2 is a table, client 3 is a table. Your life will be much, much, much simpler by linking things together, right? So having all the clients in one table, all the projects in one table, all the team members in one table, and things like that, okay? So biggest mistakes. So that really the biggest mistakes I've seen is you want to try. Oh, this is a thing to do, right? It's a hint. You want to make them one table. So, for example, long form videos like have a thumbnail, but shorts and reels and things like don't have a thumbnail, right? But if you have depending on the volume of your business, you probably want to put them all into one table and just have a selection box with like long form versus short form, for example. Okay, it's going to make your life a lot easier, trust me. Okay, if you find yourself creating a property that's like a list of things, so for example, like Dave, Sue, Sally are all the contacts for this client. You're probably, if you have like commas in your like lists of things in a field, that probably means you need a separate table to track that. So that's like the client contacts example, right? And then the third thing to keep in mind is pay attention to where information is stored, like where it's updated and where you want to see it. And these don't have to be the same thing. So, for example, let's say you have I'll give you a really simple example and then you'll get it. So you have a client table and a projects table, right? Every project is linked to a client. Now you can update the status of the project on every project. So that's like where you would update information, but you probably also want to see at the client level if this client has any unfinished projects. Okay, now some people that are more beginners at Airtable, or maybe they're used to like Google Sheets, for example, would be used to manually setting at the client level, like, oh yeah, all the projects are done, like this one's good, right? But really the best implementation of that would be a reflection of simply what's in the project table. So you only have to update that information in one place at one time. It can't get out of sync, right? So you want to see the information at the client level, but update it at the project level. So keep in mind there's, you can do that with like things like lookup tables and roll-ups and things like that. But keep in mind that there is a difference between where information is seen and where it's updated, right? You have a project that's submitted, and it's submitted at this date, and the deadline date is this other date. You would want to, that's the update there, but you'd want to see it at the team member level. You say, well, this team member is always late. And that's a formula based on the project itself. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So you start with like planning out the relationships. And then after you plan out the relationships, you want to do the calculated KPIs and statuses. So this is when I talk about like updating versus seeing, I'm talking about statuses. When I'm talking about like deadline stuff, it would be calculations. So you probably have to do some math here. Hopefully math is not as scary for you as other people. I love math because of its power. But we want to look at what are all the numbers that you want to see that are based on in other places that are like aggregate fields. So for example, you probably want to see like the amount of unpaid invoices per client. Well, that's a math formula, right? That's a total of all the invoices that have an unpaid status rolled up per client, right? Maybe you want to show as well beside there, like when you actually issued the invoice. Because if you issued the invoice yesterday, the fact that it's unpaid is like not really a huge deal, right? Whereas if you have a client, and like maybe your account manager or your finance person is going through, they would want to see like, hey, listen, this client has, $10,000 of unpaid invoices, and we issued the last invoice to them like 2 months ago. Like that's a much different thing, right, than an invoice from yesterday. So you probably want to see that. These are some examples. You probably want to see like, the relative difficulty of a project, for example, so you can allocate that project appropriately. So maybe you want to kind of combine how soon it's due with the overall size, with some of the complexity stuff. You probably want to see like the current workload for every one of your team members. This all would depend on the size of your business and what the biggest issues are for you right now. But you can dream at this point. Like what I would suggest you do is treat this as like if you were designing your perfect business where you could see all the status all the time everywhere. What would you want to know? If you're not sure, you can of course book a call with us, or you can pause the video and read through some of these examples as well. Okay, so in Airtable, these are called roll-up, count, lookup, and formula fields. So I'll just pull up Airtable right now so you can see what I mean. So let's see. Let's say great. Start from scratch. Oh, here we go. Okay, so we have like a brand new Airtable. Let's say we have clients and projects. If every project is linked to a client. All right, so again, when we get into like data design, you have to consider the details, right? So every project only has one client. You can't have a project or like a landing page, for example, that's split across clients, right? So little details like this really matter. What I mean by a roll-up is this field here. You can do different conditions and things like that. Anyway, so like you can look up the how-to on the specific functions here, but I want to share more about like the actual design here. All right, so that's what I mean by roll-up, count, lookup, and formula field types. So for example, like this might be like the amount that a project was late is assigned minus submitted date. Or you might do what we do, which is like a lateness score, because it might be like sent to the editor or the writer like 3 weeks ago, and it was due now, and they submitted it really late, which is a huge problem, versus one that was huge. It was very, very last minute, and the writer pulled off this, or the editor pulled off a heroic effort. So you may want to think about what the right math equation is to tell a story that you want to tell. Okay. All right. So we would do formulas like this. I'll just zoom in here. You can see these are, of course, all math equations, but they're math equations meant to represent a decision in someone's head. So, for example, this is an equation to represent how receptive a given writer is to getting a project, how often they say yes over the last time frame, right? So all of these things, this is, if it feels overwhelming right now, don't worry too much. This is an ongoing design process. Even for us, when we're designing stuff for clients, like, it's not like we just whip it all out in a weekend and get it done and it's perfect from day one. The way that we find that works the best, honestly, is you start with like your best guess as to the basic data structure, and then watch how your team uses it and make adjustments as you go, right? That is fully okay. That's what we do. We find that like it's called a sprint. So you do a set amount of work, implement something, your team has time to get used to it, and then you see how they're using it, right? So anyway, all of these, the stuff that we do, I guess I looked, it's actually step 4. Okay. The stuff we do in step 4 is based on step 3. The stuff we do in step 3 is based on 2 and then 1, etc. So please do make sure you go through. You really can't skip like defining the right data types and relationships. If you skip that, you're really not going to be able to do the calculated KPIs. Okay. So the next step is dashboards. Okay. So here's some examples. I'm going to actually have a whole other thing for dashboards. Dashboards. Okay, so we did a data architecture, right? So we have 2. Let me see. What is this one? Okay. So this 2, we're gonna go look at step 3 here. Looks we got the same document link twice. Okay. So after you have all the tables structured, it's now time. The really, really cool thing about Airtable is you can have one source of data and see it in different ways. Okay, so you're probably used to grids and graphs and Kanbans and all these different pivot tables. All of these, like, there's different views on the same back-end data. Okay, so we're going to talk about how do you next design views based on your process. Okay, we're going to look at interfaces and graphs and pretty stuff later, but first, views are a lot easier for people to understand, a lot faster to implement. They tend to be a little less intimidating. So views, all right? How do you do this? And it's there's lots of different considerations for this. So the best type of view, it depends on a few factors. So who is it using? Who is using it? So is this being used by a manager who needs like a very high level overview of the status of something? Is it used by like a VA or an editor or a writer who's actually updating the status of the thing? Maybe they don't need to see like the big picture, but they certainly need to be able to edit things easily, right? A manager, right? So like a Kanban versus a group grid. We'll go over some examples in a second. Are they managed first in, first out, or do first? So for your process, you may have, for example, an editor, a video editor, who's getting a bunch of videos and saying, okay, I have to edit this video and push it to the next step, edit the next video, push that to the next step. Or is it do first? So you have like a manager looking at a team of writers and saying, okay, like this one is due first. I have to work on this one first. So there's a due date component versus just like a pure volume component. Right? Are there multiple levels to configure? So for example, we have a few SEO clients, and what they typically do is they'll have a client. The client's content plan includes different content silos that are all based around certain topics. Within the silo is article. So this is a pipeline, but there's different levels to the pipeline. So if you have multiple levels, I'll show you some examples of what you can do there. Right? And is it like so example, like an application funnel where applicants are looked at one at a time and have to be like kind of approved. So we'll look at things like cards, group grids, filters, Kanbans, group versus ungroup grids, lists, all these kind of things. So I'm going to show you some examples of views that you can configure with Airtable. So the first one is a grouped grid, or sorry, a list. It looks like this. This is great for multiple tiers of data where you actually want to be able to see all the levels and update the levels at different times. So we have this is like a couple of our clients. We have like the client number 1, client name here. We have their billing status. They've all paid up. The sprint. And so all of our features are grouped into sprints. And so whether it's on pace or not, and then the subjective happiness of the client. So this allows someone to get like a very, very zoomed out view and a very, very zoomed in view. They can go in and out, which is the cool thing about the list view. The Kanban is really awesome. I'll show you some examples of this in a second. The Kanban is really excellent for showing people an entire pipeline all at once. And so it's great for VAs, and it's also great for times when the process is like a little bit immature. So maybe you're not exactly sure that the order of the steps, or that these steps are the right steps, because it allows everybody to see like the full picture, and they're very comfortable because they're like, okay, I know the entire process. I can see everything, right? This is a great view for a Kanban. Kanban's best for the individual VA, right? Because then they can see the minute detail, whereas a manager can see this kind of high level dashboard, right? Maybe you have many, many VAs looking at this and one manager looking at this, okay? You could also have grouped grids like this. So this is an SEO example where you have the topical silo, right? And then under that topical silo, you've got several articles, and we want to create views that like group things together in that fashion, right? And then we'd also have things like a card. So cards are great because it compiles everything. It's not in a huge line that you have to scroll back and forth. It's captured like this. This is great for applications, okay? So again, some examples of what you can do with views. The really, really cool thing about Airtable is once you have your data structure sorted, you can play around with different views and say, actually, you know, I kind of like seeing it like this because this reason, okay? But hopefully I'll give you some examples of what is possible so you can get the full scope. Okay. So you may have heard of interfaces versus views. So an interface has like the graphs on it, and the view is like the kind of the grid and kind of looks like fancy Excel. Okay. So what are some examples, or what do they both do, and why should you choose one versus the other? We'll talk about interfaces in a second. But here's what they both provide and why I like them, Airtable better than Google Sheets. So the first reason is that you can create many different views on the same data. So you may have been used to like Trello, for example. So Trello is a Kanban, right? It looks kind of like this, right? But Trello doesn't allow you to provide the grid shape that Google Sheets does. So we've talked to people that use both Google Sheets and Trello, and we just replace both of them with one Airtable and with two different views. And the advantage of that is you can have a Trello board that's just for one editor, and a Trello board that's for another editor, and then a manager looking at both, or a manager seeing everything at once in a grid. So it allows different people to see the data in different ways. Okay, so that's the first thing, is different views on the same data, right? So this is really like, the cool thing about this is there's probably stuff about Trello that you like, and there's probably stuff about Google Sheets that you like. And what you like about Google Sheets and what you like about Trello is different for every system, different for every business. But Airtable allows you to create something that's really custom for you. You can save views, name them exactly how you want to name them, have the columns arranged in whatever way you want. Even different people in your business can have views customized just for them, okay? So the other one that I mentioned or alluded to earlier was a saved view per task. So that you can look up something called the jobs to be done framework. So if you think about like, what do I need to accomplish is not one thing, but it's actually several things. So as a business owner, if you have like a team of 5, let's say, you have a role to do sales, you have a role to do marketing, and you have a role to probably check in on your team to make sure everything is being done properly. And so you could have one view that's the project status view. You could have another view that's the who owes me money view. And you have another view that's something like, which team members are late versus which team members need to be trained. And all those views could be saved, all match the task that you want to accomplish, okay? So this is the really cool advantage as well. And you can pause this and read this, but basically like the framework or the things to ask yourself are, who are the people involved, what do they need to do, and then you think about what view type is best based on that. The other cool thing about Airtable is you can hide data that's no longer relevant. So let's say you're using Trello. I've talked to people, or I've seen Trello builds where they would create a different board per client. The problem is if you have like you sign 2 new clients a month or 5 new clients a month, and you also churn some number of clients per month, you're going to have eventually this, if you do business long enough, you're going to have a Trello account where you have those like tons and tons and tons of unused boards that are still cluttering up your view. All right. So Airtable allows you to hide data that's not relevant at all. So for example, any project that's from a client that's churned, you can just hide, which is really cool. And then the other cool thing is you can focus decision-making on choke points. So having, I'll give you an example. We have a client that they have a couple of proofreaders and like 60 writers that submit projects. Now the question is, which project do you work on first? Is it as simple as the one that's due first? It's actually not, because you're going to have cases where there's a project that's due like less soon, but it's actually much bigger, and it's done by a person on your team who's less experienced. So we can you can have formulas that actually do a little bit of decision making for your team, which I think is really cool. All right. So this is a formula for prioritization. All right. I'll give you an example. This is an Airtable formula. So it actually prioritizes something for somebody in the team to smooth out the decision-making process. There's another video I have on why this is effective and going into more. If you're interested in that detail, I can link to that below. So that is what both views and interfaces provide. Now let's look at the unique benefits of interfaces, which we will talk about how to do that in a second. Instead of views, so the unique benefits of interfaces is you can adjust to different users. So you can say like, if Ryan's landing page, if Ryan is the designer for these landing pages and Tony is the designer for these other landing pages, when Ryan logs in, you can actually change the way the views look, or the interface looks, so it only shows Ryan's stuff. And when Tony logs in, it's going to show only Tony's landing pages. So adapting to the user is a unique benefit of interfaces. And of course, things like graphs and things like that, which I will show you in a second in the next phase. Now, the benefits of views is, again, they're a little easier, they're a little bit more user-friendly to set up. And there is actually a limitation of the number of interfaces. I believe it's 50 or 100 per base. If you have a lot of what we do often is create a client-facing view that's just really easy to copy, paste, and go. And if you have a lot of clients, that can be a really handy application for views as well. Okay, so it's great for that part, client-facing views. So general concepts, right? So some things to think about. A filter. A filter is like, it's just what it sounds like. You can put it on the view and show some stuff versus whatever. When to not use filters. So let's say you have a list of projects. When you and your team are just getting used to Airtable, my recommendation is you don't filter out anything really at all. Because sometimes people, they get freaked out when things disappear from the view. So for example, if you have a view showing the landing pages that are in the copy phase, only the copy phase, and you don't show anything else in that same view, if someone changes the status to be like copy is complete, it'll disappear from the view. Sometimes people get freaked out about that. So I, generally speaking, at first, I actually don't recommend that you use filters. I would actually go with like a grouped grid or a Kanban where it just shows everything, so everybody's has a little bit of time to get comfortable with Airtable. I'll show you what this filter is. So it's this, right? So you can say, well, the status is whatever. So that is so where we did this part already. This one. Okay, so I actually would wait a little bit before doing filters. When you should use filters. So again, these become more and more useful as you operate for longer on Airtable, because you're going to have more and more clients, more projects, more landing pages, more videos, more whatever entities that you produce, and you're going to want to filter out the stuff that's no longer relevant. So projects that are were completed for clients that are no longer active is one example, right? Team members that have churned, but you still want to keep track of the fact that that team member did that project. You probably want to filter them out of your views. All right. So when is after you operate for a while and you're comfortable with this concept of like what a filter is. and then a how, right? So for example, if you have at the projects table, you probably want to filter out clients, any kind of project for a client that you've already churned, right? I would actually be tempted to also like leave projects in there for active clients, even if they're completed, just so your team can see it and is like comfortable with it. And then maybe you get more and more aggressive on the filtering as you and your team get more comfortable with how Airtable kind of works. Okay. You can play around with filters though, but I would generally start pretty broad and not filter anything out, and then filter out things like the completed stuff for clients that are no longer with you. And then you can get more aggressive with filters as your team gets used to it, okay? You're gonna need to as you have more and more data, but you'll get used to it, all right? So that's that. Client-specific views. So, for example, okay, so views, unfortunately, do have to be created manually. There's no API currently, as of this recording, that allows you to programmatically create views, which is kind of a bummer, but that sucks, but whatever, we'll deal with it. So client-facing views are great. You could do client-facing or you could do client-specific. So for an SEO client, and what I mean by view, by the way, is here I can duplicate this view, and over here I can hide these columns, and this one still shows all of them. So what I mean by view is this, and what I mean by type is this stuff here, Kanban, calorie, whatever. So that is what I mean. And okay, so we don't need this. So views, yeah. We have an SEO client, for example, and they produce a lot of articles per client. So actually, they have saved views per client, just so they can like kind of segment their things a little bit. They used to use Google Sheets for this. They transitioned over to Airtable, and they tripled the business, and they needed to. And so they actually do have saved views, one per client, and it's just simply filtered by the client. Okay? So that's that. When to choose different kinds of views. So a form, I will show you what that is. That is here, form. You can do Airtable forms, right? And enter in data directly into the table. So let's look at forms. So a form, again, it's just simplifying data entry. So the nice thing about a form is if you need somebody to enter in data, you can use a form to say like, enter it like this. You have to enter these fields. These are necessary. And so that is really nice. Now you may be thinking like other people have, there's type form and jot form and different types of form fields. Why would you choose, or does it make sense to choose Airtable forms over something else, right? So the pros of an Airtable form as opposed to type form, for example, is that you can modify the questions, and it's always a one-to-one match between what's in the form and what's in Airtable, right? So if you have another form service like jot form or type form, for example, you have to write custom automation to put the data in the right fields in Airtable because type form doesn't know about your Airtable form or your Airtable fields. So if you're at the beginning, maybe if you don't already have a great type form account, and you're just kind of getting used to this concept of like storing data in forms and things like that, I honestly would probably choose Airtable forms above Google Forms because Google Forms are great for Google Sheets, right? So think about Airtable forms as kind of like the equivalent Google Sheets, Google Forms, Airtable forms, Airtable Sheets, or Airtable database. Okay. So the other interesting, or the other cool use case of this is linking tables together. So for example, for our cold email clients, they have a call booking form that the inbox manager fills in, and they can select in the form the linked client and the linked campaign. Okay, so if you want to select linked tables or linked fields from other tables, Airtable forms allow you to do that. Other form services do not. Okay, and the other advantage is they're free. Right? So Airtable cons, Airtable forms don't look as good, frankly, as type form or something like that. So that is one thing. If it's a client-facing form, for example, you may want to consider that. They are limited in terms of feature types. So other form services allow you to put in like credit card purchases and like the city or the state and GPS locations, all these other like richer data types. Airtable forms are pretty limited. I'll show you like Like really, this is, you could do like drop downs, you can do linked, things, drop downs, but you're really that the form or the field types here are limited to exactly what you see in Airtable. There's emails, there's phone numbers, these URLs, but like there's no real, the validation is not as good. It just the form data is not as good. So that is another limitation. And conditional logic and other stuff is just much better, right? So if they select A, go in like this path, whereas Airtable is like just if they select A, hide or show this field. So it's pretty basic. It's okay for a lot of applications, but there's some definitely drawbacks. Okay, so a Kanban. Okay, a Kanban kind of like Trello, right? You move things along a process. I'll show you how their Kanban looks here. All right, so this is a Kanban, right? You have to select a field. I recommend a status field. And by the way, I recommend you number your statuses. Like 0 is new, 10 is like, copy in progress. 20 is like submitted for QA, etc. Okay, I recommend you number them like this. And the reason for that is you can extract the number and do lots of interesting logic with the number in like Zapier or Make, and that way you can reference the number and your logic isn't going to break if you change the name of the step, which you probably will at some point. All right, so that's that. But a Kanban looks exactly like this, where you can have things and you drag them along. So project or client 1, client 2, client 3. So imagine this as your onboarding process where it goes through. This is copy, I guess. This is like whatever. You guys get the idea. All right. So that is a Kanban. What is it best for? It's best for showing everything, right? So it's showing every status. Now, if you have a process where you're still you're like, I need to make some changes to this. I'm not really sure if this is the right number of steps, or maybe we want to shift around how this works. Kanban is great because it shows everybody the entire process. Everybody's like, it's very comforting to know that data is not being lost. So it's very nice for everybody to see like everybody sees the full picture, right? It's also great for VAs, right? If you have like a bunch of different VAs, like editors or writers or whatever else, that are completing projects, they can use a Kanban because they can see, okay, yes, I'm done that step. You can almost like take your SOP and build it into the Kanban, right? Which is kind of nice. However, for a project manager who wants to like see the overview of where everything else is at, a grid is a much better view for that, right? So again, it did mention the assembly line thing. So like the model of the assembly line, everybody kind of, it's a visual representation of that, which is pretty nice. And it really does that really well when things are still in flux. After you use a Kanban for a while, you're going to realize, okay, like it's always like this, and I'll show you other view types in an interface that's going to be more helpful. But for the, say, beginners, a Kanban can be nice, especially when a process is in flux. Okay, the downside really is it doesn't allow for grouping. So let's say you have a bunch of articles in an SEO silo. A Kanban just was going to show everything all at once. It doesn't allow to group things together, which is a bit of a downside. And I did hint that it's not great for managers or PMs. Imagine, for example, you've got like 200 items in this Kanban, right? You're going to have like, it's going to scroll way down, and it's going to be, you're going to have a lot of items here and have to scroll. And so that scrolling thing is just, it is really annoying. So Kanban is not great for manager types. You really like, if you're managing stuff, you really want to be looking at it in like a grid shape instead. Okay. And then if any given record or step would have like a lot of records in it, or the record that what you want to show is like quite large, the cards can get quite large. And so it's really not a great view for that. Okay. So this is a Kanban. Here's an example. And like you would start with a company brain. This is our kind of flowchart example. And so this models to this, right? Things move along the step. And so that's a Kanban is like a nice entry point into that model. Cool, right? Sweet. Okay, a grouped grid. Okay, a grouped grid is great. Like if a Kanban is best for like a VA or an editor, a grouped grid is great for a project manager. Okay, so really, statuses with no records are not shown, which makes it cleaner. So for example, if I was looking at this, the Kanban shows me step 20, but if I have a grid, so a grid like this, and I group it by the status, I don't see step 20 on here. So if you have lots of steps where you want to compress the view a little bit, this is a much more compressed view than a Kanban, which would require me to scroll back and forth. And there's all these statuses with no items in there. So this is a far better view for a manager type, and the Kanban is really more appropriate for a VA or person doing the actual work. All right, so that's that. It's easier to gather updates from external sources. So like imagine like it's like popcorn, right? You're kind of sitting back as a project manager and you're seeing like updates happen. The Kanban is the person actually making the popcorn, or like doing the thing, and then you, the manager, are like just seeing updates, and you're just seeing things happen, and so it's easier to zoom out. Whereas a Kanban is more for the person that's actually exerting effort on the thing and moving it, right? So, like I said, the VA doing the work would actually use the Kanban, and the manager would use the grouped grid, for example. It's a much more helpful view. And then of course like subgroups of projects, we call it like a nested pipeline, where you'd want to see it grouped like this, and that's for SEO or UGC. The grouped thing is a much more helpful view. Okay, an ungrouped grid. When would you want to not group the grid? Because it seems like, oh, this grouped grid thing is so handy. Why don't we always do it like that? Well, we wouldn't always do it like that, because sometimes it's not this. You don't want to see like the status. You want to see the due date. All right. So if you have a lot of clients, this grid, for example, was created for a client that does like 100 different clients per day with very small projects. You really do want to edit it or view the grid by the due date first. Just sort it by due date and make sure that most effort is exerted on the thing that's due first. Right. That's really. It's deadline based versus status based, right, is the thing. So this would be more appropriate for fewer, like higher ticket stuff, fewer clients, maybe more like micro deliverables per client. And this would be more appropriate for lots and lots and lots of clients with a small project and deadline first thinking. Right, so it's ungrouped grids. Okay, a list. A list is great at showing management at multiple levels. All right. So, for example, for us, we manage clients. Every client has multiple sprints that start a few weeks apart, and then every sprint has features. And so we need to see what's the client doing. We need to maybe update whether the client's happy or not, and really it was based on what we've delivered for the client and how are the individual features coming along, and we would want to roll up the status at the sprint level. Okay? So we can do up to 3 levels, as 3 levels is max. And really, it's helpful for managing at multiple levels, kind of like this. Yeah, that's a list. And then cards. Cards are great for managing like job applicants, applicants like for a sales funnel, like call applicants, seeing all the information. This is a sales funnel thing. And so that would be what a card is for. And the nice thing about a card is you can stack all the information vertically like this, and it compresses the view rather than showing it on a grid and you have to scroll all the way across to see it, right? So it just rearranges the data in a vertical format, which is a little easier to see, and you can customize what is shown here in the card. All right? So that is that for phase 3. Phase 4, KPIs, volume specific KPIs. Now, you have your table, you have your system archetype, and you have, let's say you have a landing page agency, right? What kind of KPIs should you choose for a landing page agency? Well, that depends on whether you do 1 landing page per day or 5 landing pages per day or 200 landing pages per day, right? And the reason it comes down to is statistical significance, which means, it's not really worthwhile measuring something that like never happens because the numbers are going to be all over the place and too noisy. So phase 4 is creating volume specific KPIs. Let's look at how to do that. Okay, so here we go. Really, the mindset here to think about is like, just because you have a pretty graph doesn't mean it's useful to you, right? So how do you think about appropriate KPI design? And again, this is all based on if you can create useful views, then you can create great dashboards and great interfaces and great KPIs. If you don't have your table structure right, if you can't get it in a view and can't think about the view in terms of a useful way, this is going to be next to impossible. And so I really would suggest that you get the right table structure. This is all a foundation that builds on itself. Okay, so this is a screenshot of an open source CRM we have. You can download this. I'll leave a link below, and you can kind of think about, or you can use this as an example of how to think about KPIs. Okay, so really what we're going to do in this phase here is talk about how to pick the right KPI to measure in the first place, like close rate or the average number of days to produce a landing page or whatever it is. And then design how they're shown. So is it a bar graph? Is it a line graph? Is it a pie chart? Is it a number thing? And how is it grouped? So is it grouped by designer? Is it grouped by client? Is it done by week, by month, by day, by year? All these are considerations, and they're all based on the overall volume of the system. So, for example, let's say you have a landing page agency and you're like, I want to measure how my landing page agency is going. Well, should you measure like the average number of days to complete the last step? Maybe, but maybe the last step is like partially determined based on the client, and it varies a lot based on the type of landing page that you're doing. And so maybe that KPI is like not that informative, but maybe you want to measure something like per team member, the average approval percentage on the first time that you submit a landing page to the client, right? Or maybe you find the client KPI or the client QA is all over the place. And really what you want to do is like, how many days is it between the landing page project starting and the first time the client sees it? Right, or how many clicks did the landing page get on average per day after it's been online for the conversion rate, the average conversion rate increase. So picking the proper KPIs is really important for how useful your dashboards are and how quickly you can improve your business. So this is something we think a lot about at Ops Kings. And I'm going to walk you through our thinking process, or like how we do this. So, okay. So really what we want to do is thinking about this with 3 audiences. So you have the KPIs or the dashboard, but who is it for? Number 1 is for your team. Number 2 is for you, the management of the company, to improve the overall process. And number 3 is for your clients. So your clients need to see, how is my thing going? Right? How far along is my thing, which might be a client-specific roadmap or a client-specific view or interface, right? You need to make sure your thing your business is improving and going well. And number 3 is your team actually has to see how they're doing, maybe gamify their job a little bit and gamify their performance, and then also do their actual work, right? They have to actually update things and know what to work on first. So why don't you just manage everything through the views, right? Why do we actually do dashboards and graphs and things like that? And the big thing is it's less distracting. So it's fewer clicks, so you can combine information from multiple tables to get information in one place, right? Which means that everything is faster. The second thing is there's fewer errors. So if you have your team manage things through the tables, there's lots of things they can edit that you don't want them to edit or see, and they can get messed up and make a mistake, which is not good. And then data that tells a better story. You can actually create a dashboard, whether it's a graph or just some stuff like information from the tables arranged a certain way that allows them to see what's going on. Again, really this is just faster with less errors as well. Okay, so here's the high-level steps. Number one, you have to make sure you do everything we talked about before. The company brain has to be there. System archetype has to be there. There are common KPIs for that system archetype. So we have, you can scroll. I'll scroll through this, and then you can screenshot this or whatever. But those are the common KPIs that we think about. And again, this depends on the volume. And okay, so we have this part. Okay, system archetype, KPIs. We also think about the org chart. So one of the things you can do is list out your org chart, and because that gives you a sense of who are all the audiences that I need to build interfaces for. We always do this in the first company brain call. We want to know who's involved internally and externally, because these are all the people that need information. And then for each of those people, we do what's called a jobs to be done analysis. So as a video editor, I need to know what video to edit next. I need to know, gamify my performance so I can kind of try to beat my own high record. So it's like, that's the second thing. And then I also need to be able to know the requirements of a video and edit, like change the fact that the video is done when I finish editing the video, right? So taking each of the people in your team or each of the roles in your team and breaking it down into a jobs to be done analysis. This term, you can Google this term. It's not it's an industry term. And so we think about what is the actual job the jobs that somebody needs to do. Okay. And that could be a KPI as well. So you as the business owner need to know if you should fire somebody if their performance is really sucking and it's a trend. That's one thing you have to know, right? As an example, you also have to know which clients owe you money, right? Or you might want to see the average number of calls booked per week and the source of those calls and the quality of the leads, for example, okay? To know if your marketing is working. Okay, so after you do the job to be done, you're going to create an interface for each person. That includes you, by the way. So it includes people on your team, like if you have a designer role and a copywriter role and a QA role. You might have an account manager role, so you'd create views for that, for yourself, for your clients. And then for each graphic KPI, you want to design what story you want to tell with that graph. So the first step, the first thing we think about is taking your system archetype and picking KPIs. All right. So really, like the archetype defines what KPIs you could measure, and we really find that every role you probably want a lagging KPI and a leading KPI. So your designer, the people on your team may have a KPI that's like the speed at which they're like making sure that they submit this thing on time, right? Or their quality score at a certain step. But you also have a lagging KPI that might be like the average increase in conversion rate for the landing page after 6 months or 3 months. Okay, so you'd probably want to think about both of those things, but at least the leading KPI. And so what we find, so for example, you have like video editor, the long term might be like video likes or views or conversion rate, but the short term might be the quality percentage, like the amount of times that it was rejected by internal QA versus the amount of time that it got accepted. Okay. And what we find is that every role or every step is really speed focused or quality focused. So what I mean by speed focused versus quality focused is does like a minute matter at all? So if you go to a restaurant and the server takes half an hour to come to your table, but when they come to your table, their conversation is perfect and they know all the menu items and they're super polite, you're pissed because it took half an hour. So minutes matter with a speed focused thing. Quality focused thing, quality matters the most and speed is like less relevant, right? So if you have a video editing process and your video editor submits something 5 minutes late, but the edit is perfect and everything looks amazing, you're not so pissed about the 5 minutes, right? But if they submitted something in 5 minutes, you'd be like a little bit, you'd be like, how did you do that so fast? Like you would question the quality, right? So that's what I mean as a speed versus quality focused. Really, that leading KPI is its speed as long as quality is okay. So if your server came to your table really quickly, but they like hadn't showered in weeks and they didn't know anything and they were like bumping into you, like you'd be like, yeah, the speed is okay, but like the quality is so bad that this is actually a problem. So what I mean is not that quality doesn't matter or speed doesn't matter, but it's speed as long as quality is like above standard, and or quality as long as speed is above standard. Okay. So you cannot optimize for both of these things. You want to pick KPIs that are either speed or quality focused, and then just say speed as long as quality is like above a certain threshold. More doesn't matter, and or quality. Okay. So again, some examples here. We want to pick, or we want to consider this when choosing this, and this when choosing KPIs, as well as controllable. So you may want to, or you may think to yourself like, okay, I really care what the conversion rate is for a page after 6 months, right? Or yeah, it's a conversion rate on a page, right? But that's going to be different depending on the offer, depending on the traffic source, depending on all these different things. So rather than looking at maybe purely conversion rate, maybe you look at conversion rate increase, for example. It's a little bit more controllable. So anyway, think about picking KPIs that are controllable KPIs. Okay, so here's some considerations that we think about. If the process is a series of steps, it includes possible time delays. So for example, you're a recruiting agency, tracking something like the time to fill a role, that may actually work. But what you would want to track at the start is the time to schedule or the time to contact a qualified applicant to arrange an interview, because they may not be available for like a week and a half or 2 weeks for the actual interview. And so you don't control that 2 weeks, but you do control the time where you actually acted on it. So if there's a bunch of steps, you want to try to figure out what is under the client's, like your control. Okay. If there's external factors, you want to control for these. So that the prospect show rate, that's okay. Show rate, really common metric in sales. But there's probably value in doing show rate on the first call, because after the first call, you have a relationship with them, and like that affects that relationship, and what you did on the first call affects the show rate on the second call. Okay. And so you want to make sure that you're controlling for as many variables as possible, back to the whole like high school science class stuff, right? And then you want to also group by factors that tell a useful story. So for example, the pass rate on first submission is really useful if you look at it on a developer by developer, or editor by editor, or writer by writer perspective, right? So because you would expect that, let's say you charted that for the entire team, aggregate for your entire team, and you've got like 5 editors, or two editors, let's say. But let's say your business explodes and you hire 2 new people. You would expect that those 2 new people would have a different success rate than the people that are really experienced. So by grouping by team member, by grouping by client, by grouping by lead source, these kinds of things, you can make sure that weird stuff that you see in the data isn't the actual system going wonky on you. It's actually due to like very controllable normal factors, like, hey, these people are new, that's why our overall score is not as good. Okay. So you want to think about how you group as well. And then as well, time granularity. Do you graph? Do you have information by day, by hour, by week, by month, by quarter, by year? Really, this is the trade-off between statistical significance and responsiveness. So, for example, you do want to track often enough. See, like, let's say look at like close rate, for example, in sales, or like number, like revenue, right? New revenue by day probably matters a lot if you have like an e-com business and you have a lot of data points coming in every single day, maybe per week as well, right? By week, by month. But if you're a high ticket agency, graphing the close rate or the number of new clients, amount of new revenue by day is probably not a great measure, because there's lots of days where you don't sign anybody, and there's one day where it looks like your performance is through the roof. And so if there's not a lot of data points, you really don't want to measure on that time frame. Okay. So again, you can pause the video and like read through this. It was like, I just riff on examples here. So again, though, so let's say you're an you're a B2B agency and you do sales calls and you close people, right? So should you look at only look at new revenue per year? I would argue not, because there's a lot of different changes you can make to your process that would show you an improvement in your metric it would be not really shown visibly in the year-long metric. Now, maybe you do graph by year, but also by month and probably also by week as well, right? Depending on how many sales calls that you take. So we want to think about not such long time frames that the metric is not responsive, but you want to go short enough, but not too short, because you have to consider statistical significance. So this really does depend mostly on the number of data points. It's not really a revenue thing. It's, I think about the difference between like a $10 e-com product or $100 e-com product and like a $10,000 agency service. It's a very different thing. You can imagine the exact same amount of revenue. The metrics that you would measure would be entirely different. So really, we want to think about like the volume of the system, volume-specific KPIs, not revenue-specific. Okay, so that is that. And then once we have the right KPI and we have the right time frame and things like that, we need to show that KPI with the right interface element. Okay, so let's say you have the KPIs. What do we do with this stuff, right? So you filters. Filters have two purposes. Number one is grouping and clustering data. So you can filter an interface by clients, and it kind of has the same purpose as a grouped graph, right? You want to like make sure that there isn't a story at the client level or the team level or something like that, and to restrict time periods. So if I look at the example of this, I'll show you what this looks like. Okay. So this is our template, our Airtable template. When we start out with the new clients, I'll show you what a group or as a filter looks like here. So at this graph level, this is just some sample data. I can add in different elements. I can add in filters, right? So I can use filters to segment this data a little bit more. That is what I mean by filters. So the gotchas with a filter, and this is just like this is an Airtable limitation, is if you have like this tiered data, so a client has many campaigns, you can't do it. It doesn't allow you to do a client level filter, and then that client level filter changes the campaign level filter to only show campaigns for the client. It's an unfortunate thing. I wish they could actually fix this, but no, it is what it is. That is a limitation here. All right. So the way to get around this is to have a formula field and your projects label that just includes both names. And then that will work a little bit better. All right. So number fields. Number fields is exactly like you see here. All right. This is nice because this is like a big, bold, obvious number. It takes up less space than a big graph like this. Right. And so you can sell like the number of overdue features, the number of clients signed in the last week, the number of what I like a number field for is the number of things that are currently actionable. So the number of overdue things, the number of clients owe you money, the thing that's a disadvantage of a number is it doesn't show you the overall trend. Like if that number is going up or going down, you only see what it is. So to me, it's kind of like, I like it for like an inbox concept, right? Inbox 0, how many emails you have, right? How many projects are currently unfinished that need editing? It's like 7 of them, right? Graphs. Okay. So there's times when you should not use a graph, and there's times when you should use a graph, right? If you have this kind of concept where you want to look at something changing over time, graph is awesome. Or if you have a concept where you want to look at performance of things that don't get added to in the case of normal production, a graph is great. A graph is not great when you have like a graph like this, which is like an example we put together to show you when to not use a graph, it would be the campaign performance. And the problem with a campaign performance graph is like there's always new campaigns being added to during production. So you could produce a graph like this on day one and think, oh, there's only 4 campaigns, we're good to go. But after a couple of months, you have a graph that is ridiculously busy like this, and it's no longer great. So in this case, we would use a grid, not a graph. Okay? So we have a metric called return on emails sent, which is just a campaign by campaign metric. And so a graph in this case, where during the normal case of production, new records are being added to this all the time, you do not want to use a graph. Okay? But normally a graph is much more informative than just a regular grid. Okay? So if you have this if it's a case of time, like days or weeks or months, you can of course just bucket things by day, week, month. So if it's a trend that you would expect to like change with time, like gradually up and gradually down, you can just do the time thing. But yeah, that's an example of a bad graph. So when do you use a bar graph? All right, so there's no such thing as a stacked line graph. If you want to do stacked graphs, as in group your output by team member, for example, a graph with a bar graph or stacked graph is great. You cannot do that with, there's no such thing as a stacked line graph in Airtable currently. So that is one reason to do a stacked graph kind of like this. And the other case for a bar graph is if you're not graphing things over time. So if you're graphing changes over time, a line graph is really handy because you can bucket by day, week, month, and even show like differences between two people's performance as like a graph going up and down like this. But I'll zoom into this as well and show you what we do use a bar graph for, which is these are just the steps of our process and the amount of time spent in each step. Okay, so this is not an example of something changing over time. This is just like total values. Most times we actually prefer to use a bar graph because it like fills up more color and it looks a little cooler, I think. The bottom part being filled is great. I wish Airtable would actually implement a stacked line graph. I think that'd be really slick. But for now, bar graph is pretty good. Line graph is great for showing differences in performance between two things. So, for example, this is two different or few different proofreaders, and so you can see like a line graph allows you to show the difference in performance and one going above the other, kind of like this, right? A bar graph in Airtable you can't do. In Excel or Google Sheets you can do like graphs that are kind of side by side like this. I think a line graph shows that story a lot better, so we prefer a line graph for that. So if you're showing stuff, correlations between these things, and when you can infer that the information between 2 points is just the average. So for example, if it's day by day changes, you can infer that if on day 1 it was this and day 2 is this, then the middle is the middle. And when you don't have to stack or group, right? Okay. And then pie charts. Pie charts are super interesting because they're easy to get wrong. If you want the percentage breakdown, if that tells you a more compelling story than the total amount, a pie chart is great for you. So what do I mean? What do I mean by that, right? If you have a CRM or sales system, you could track something like the total calls closed as a graph, but this is like a little bit of a vanity metric. That doesn't really tell you like if anybody's doing their job right. What you would want to do instead is track total calls booked, right, for different sources, because that's like an SDR metric or whatever, ad metric, as well as the close percentage as two separate things. So the deal status after a couple of calls, that is a great thing to graph on a pie chart because you're showing percentages on different parameters. And then you would show a separate graph showing the total number of calls booked. Okay. So again, there's a lot of there's a lot of mistakes with mixing up pie charts and bar graphs and line graphs in terms of having a graph that doesn't really tell you something or it tells you misleading information. And so here's our thoughts on pie charts. Okay. Second thing is a Kanban. Should you use a Kanban? We went over that in another one. And then let me show you some bad examples of interfaces. So you know what I mean. This pie chart is bad. Right? And the reason it's bad is because the number of campaigns is growing in normal production, and like showing as one thing is getting better, it appears as though the other things are getting worse. So in this case, the total email sent by campaign would be better done with a bar graph, a stacked bar graph, because if one of the campaigns is sending more emails, you would want the overall thing gets better as well. So you wouldn't want it to show as if one campaign is getting better and the other campaigns are getting worse. So the thing with the pie chart is if one slice gets bigger, the other ones get smaller. And so there are cases where percentages really matter, but email sent is not one of those times. Okay, we have some stuff on interface-specific clients. Let's move on. Okay, so we talked about volume-specific KPIs, statistical significance. The last piece, or the step 5, is archetypes. Task archetypes. Now, you have system archetypes, but within that system, there's different task archetypes, right? So let's look at that. Okay, so hopefully you're working on some of this deliverable creation, right? This is something like if you have a copywriter and the copywriter gets requirements and has to produce some stuff, this is the task here. So we talked about dashboards and like the high level graphs. Let's talk about like the individual micro steps that a person on your team, maybe that's you, is going to have to actually do. The things that you would show on the interface to do that task are a little bit different. So, for example, deliverable creation, probably the most common one that people are most familiar with. And what I've got here is breaking this down into what is done, how it's worked on, useful interfaces, and when do I do the task, and so on and so forth. Okay, so deliverable creation, for example, it's things like creating a lead list for cold email, coding a feature for Ops Kings, right, is one. But let's look at a really interesting example. Imagine you have a UGC agency. Okay, so we have a few clients that do UGC. And for a UGC agency, the way it works is a client would pay you and you would try to figure out, you produce a bunch of content and then you run ads in that content and try to figure out which piece of content worked the best. And then based on the end of that result and the goals of the brand, try to figure out what kinds of concepts to do next. So there's a couple of different roles in that process. So the overall process is a matching funnel system, Archetype, which we talked about here. This one, right? This is UGC. Right, let's make this green. But the one system archetype has many different task archetypes within it. Okay, so deliverable creation. You have a person in here who's in charge of video editing. So they're going to get the raw files from the creator, and they have to take those raw files and edit the video. That is a deliverable creation task. Okay. After the media buying, or after the edit is done, you would have an approval task. So the way that approval works and the way that deliverable creation work as tasks are a little bit different, right? So the difference between deliverable creation and approval is done when something is ready to check, and deliverable creation is done when the requirements are ready. And really this is done based on, deliverable creation is based purely on the one that's due first, but approval may not be done based on due first. Because let's imagine I have a bunch of different video editors. I run pretend I run a UGC agency. Let's say I have a bunch of different video editors and I'm looking at their content. All right. I probably, at the simplistic view, you would say the one that's due first. But really what I want to do is consider the fact that some video editors are more beginner than others. And the ones that are the more experienced ones, I can probably get away with doing those a little bit last minute because the likelihood they will be good from the start is very high. Whereas one that maybe has a longer time until the due date, but is done by a more junior editor, effectively their due date is more at risk. So how do you prioritize what to work on first, which affects the order in which you want to sort things in the interface for an approval step, is a bit different. So really what we look at is risk of not meeting that deadline, which is not the same as how close the deadline is. Because the risk of not meeting the deadline is comprised of how junior is the person doing the work, how soon is the deadline, but also how large is the project. Okay? So you can read through this here, but basically it's an aggregate score, whereas the deliverable creation is just based on pure due date. All right? What do I need to do the task, again, is different. Right? So we need a QA checklist for this, and then I need like an SOP for this, right? We have some example automation ideas. I'll scroll through here and you can screenshot based on the different task archetypes. You can screenshot this. Okay, so the next thing is round strategy. So let's say I've edited videos, someone has approved them. That's that approval step, right? And now it's time to figure out what to do next. So that's round strategy. Whereas deliverable creation and approval is done one at a time, round strategy, whether that be rounds for UGC creation, rounds for us for features for Ops Kings or anything else, is done as a collective. So the round strategy task archetype for UGC, for example, or that task archetype in general, is done looking at everything all at once. So what that person would need to see is the performance of everything at once and the original requirements or hypothesis that was used to figure that out. Okay? So how it's worked on is all at once, and you figure out what to do now, next, and never. So our account managers, when they're talking to clients, are doing round strategy. They're trying to say, well, based on this client's business right now, what features do they need to implement next? What features are, now, what features will be done next? Like maybe we're not quite sure what the requirements are yet, or it's not a highest priority right now. And then what things, maybe we change things from now, next to never. And maybe our account managers will talk to our clients and say, yeah, actually now we've changed our business model. This feature idea that we thought was really important, now we're never going to do this. Okay, so that's a round strategy thing. They're looking at our account managers, the account manager for a UGC process. They'll look at everything as a collective. Okay, when do we do round strategy? We do it when there's enough information from the previous rounds to do it. So our account managers do the same thing. All right, and then the last task archetype is candidate curation. So you want to look at all the candidates and figure out the best one, right? So again, for UGC or for recruiting, or we have some real estate clients that will look at a bunch of lease applicants for a property and try to figure out like how much do I need to fill this property and who is the best candidate for that property. They're all doing candidate curation. So you can see how these task archetypes are common amongst different system archetypes. And they do actually, the nature of what I work on first and what do I need to do in my job? Do I need to look at a lot of things at once, or do I need to do things one at a time? Affects the kind of interface you would design for Airtable. So again, when we're looking at this, we're looking at the kinds of things I would display on an interface like this, right? So copy is an example of a deliverable creation. So I would say, well, the copywriter needs to see like the copy doc and the project files and some comments and requirements and a status thing and then like a button to submit it, right? Your quality person would want to have it ranked in a different way. And you'd obviously want to have a different button, like approve or reject, right? So anyway, what I would think about, and I know that was a lot to go over in one, but we've got to the final phase. The last would be automation. So even with just doing everything we talked about now through phase 1 through phase 5, if you take all your data and you look at how your business works, identify the system archetype. We talked about this kind of system archetypes. If you then create your data architecture and do great views and team dashboards and volume specific KPIs, and then do interface specific dashboards and like interfaces so your team can execute each of their task archetypes well. If you just do that, your business will be much, much smoother. You can then add automation on top of this. That is all I have for you today. If you would like help with this, this is what we do. We will get on a call with you and map out your company brain. Then after that, we will design actually Airtable front ends. We start with actually the interfaces and things like that with a wireframe and give you some sense of how things will operate. We build out all your tables for you, and then we do a sprint based model. So we'll do a little bit, watch how you use it, adapt, and iterate as we go. So if you would like help with that, I'm one half of the founding partners of Ops Kings. We have a whole team that does this for us, and they're all trained by myself and my co-founder Tony. And so I will leave a link below if that is something that is of interest to you. We primarily work with businesses that are looking to scale aggressively, right? So we would phrase ourselves, we're a growth partner, not a cost-cutting exercise. So if you're super ambitious about doing the best fulfillment that you can for your client's sake and for your team's sake and for your sake, then let us know. And I think that is all for today. If you have any questions on anything I went over today, let me know in the comments below. And that's all. See you, folks.